Good morning everyone, it's Danny. Today we're going to discuss about something that I've actually wanted to make a video of for some time now. I really don't remember what debates I had with my viewers in the past, but I just decided to make this video. And this is a small comparison, theoretical comparison, let's call it, between orchids that live in nature versus the orchids that we grow at home. As you know, everybody discusses about how to properly mimic the conditions an orchid would receive in nature, so we know how to better care for it in our home. Well, all is fine and dandy when you're referring to environmental conditions such as light quantity, humidity quantity, temperature, and so on. These are essential things that orchids depend on. Most of the times, they are the main factors, and it's really okay to try to compare ourselves and our conditions with the ones they would receive in nature. This is actually helping us to better grow our orchids, of course. But there are those things that happen in nature which we really don't talk about, and actually we don't want them to happen in our home, although they're an important part of nature, and this is natural selection. If there is one perfect thing in this world, that would be nature, along with its miraculous adaptation and evolution. So everything you see around you is the result of that adaptation, and everything around you is perfectly perfect. Now I bet you that if you would go in nature to observe orchids growing in the wild, you will be both bewildered and amazed, and also shocked at how cruel nature can be. In nature, every little thing and creature plays an important role actually in the whole balance of things, even pests and even rots and diseases. These are designed to keep the number or the population to a low quantity, let's say, or to a balanced quantity, so that there is never something that takes over the world. Imagine plants taking over the world and actually starting to feed on animals. That would be scary, huh? Now, by natural selection, nature only kept the strongest and the fittest of individuals, so they can carry a good and strong gene for future generations, and thus ensuring the existence of a particular race or species of plants or animals or whatever you want. Now, this doesn't really apply to our orchid collection. We want everybody to survive, even the weakest, even the most diseased of orchids. We are trying to cure it and so on. So practically, we're not selecting the best orchids or the fittest orchids. We are just trying to keep everybody alive. And by doing so, we're trying to avoid viruses, bacteria, fungal attacks, pests, and so on. So as much as we try to imitate nature, there are certain things that we really don't want to imitate. And this is just for our benefit and our own enjoying of orchids. So when you're trying to provide the best conditions to your orchid, you won't necessarily provide all of the conditions an orchid would face in nature. You are trying to eliminate the things that could kill an orchid. And this eliminates the idea of actually recreating the perfect or the identical conditions an orchid would receive in nature. Now, why am I talking about this? Well, I recently watched a video of an orchid lover, and at some point she was saying that she doesn't like to use cinnamon to sterilize cuts or to limit rot and so on, because cinnamon is something that orchids would not find in nature, so there's no point in using it. Well, to be honest, I'm not sure if there is any point of using it. As you know, many people have many opinions, and regarding cinnamon, some might say that it has no antibacterial or antifungal properties. Some people swear by it, so it's just a mixed feeling about it. The truth of the matter is that you're not actually trying to recreate all of the conditions an orchid would face in nature. Yes, it will not find any cinnamon in nature to sterilize its cuts. But also in the wild, orchids die, and there's a massive amount of them that die simply because they had a bacterial infection or fungal infection, and they simply were not strong enough to counter it. But this is the cruel truth about nature, and by cruel, I just try to put it in a morality point of view. Nothing is actually cruel about it. Everything is logical, and everything is perfect just the way it is. Now, speaking about things that orchids don't necessarily find in nature, they would certainly not find seaweed extract or fish emulsion or whatever things we use to make them grow happier. And the issue with cinnamon not found in nature becomes pretty much an invalid point. Now, I think it's wonderful that some people want to grow their orchids as natural as possible. I think it's wonderful to examine an orchid and how it behaves, and sometimes examine and observe how it fights off pests or diseases or stuff like that. And one thing I've discovered is that orchids actually regenerate. They shed the old leaves. Just because of this reason, the orchid let's call it, knows what's happening in nature. It knows that older leaves are prone to all sorts of staining and sunburns and so on, so they are not functioning properly. That's why it always creates new leaves and periodically sheds the old leaves. Now, I think it's a wonderful trait of adaptation, and I've discovered it and observed it in my own collection. But imagine if you're trying to raise your orchid as natural as possible, you would be able to observe some orchids that do fight off by themselves fungal infections and so on. You would also observe orchids that die and don't make it, because you're actually observing the natural way of how things work. At the same time, advocating that stuff that are not found in nature for orchids should not be used in orchid growing, I think is very wrong and pretty dangerous for, let's say, the orchid lovers who do want to have some orchids, spend some money on them, and want to keep them healthy. Those orchids lovers just want to have beautiful orchids. Maybe they're not really interested on how things work in nature and so on. So saying you should not use cinnamon because in nature you could not find it is actually pretty dangerous to say to an orchid lover that maybe would be affected if it loses an orchid. So to conclude, when you're reporting your growing environments to nature, keep in mind there are some cruel things happening in nature as well. Some things might happen in your collection as well, which are perfectly natural and normal, even though you might not want them to happen. And you trying to fix it and trying to keep everybody alive is just a human trait. And this is what we do. We are trying to keep everybody alive, to give everybody chances. This is what makes us human. So don't be too hard on yourself if your orchids are not doing so well sometimes, if they're attacked by all sorts of diseases. Everything is natural, and if you're trying to fix them, then good for you. But if you hear articles saying that you shouldn't use this and that because orchids don't necessarily find this in nature, well, try to make a balance out of things. I don't think extremes or extreme thinking is good when you're talking about things that are relative, actually. So if you've ever thought if an orchid receives fungicide or pesticide in nature, just forget about it. I think it's just a sterile thing. If you want to keep your orchids as natural as they can, do so. It's a wonderful thing to observe them. But also take into consideration that things you might not like are natural and are actually happening. And don't be so upset if your orchid will die or will not do so good if you just followed strictly the rules applied to nature. If, however, you feel guilty about using stuff orchids would not need in nature, don't feel guilty about it. You're just trying your best to grow your orchids the way you want to. And bottom line is your enjoyment and feeling good about yourself. Every living thing we try to keep around us, whether there's plants, animals, maybe insects, or spiders, or stuff like that, they will not benefit of the same treatment they would receive in nature. In nature, things are just slightly more brutal than what you offer to your pets or to your plants. So in any way, do not feel guilty or do not feel not good about yourself that you're not actually imitating nature perfectly. You're not even supposed to. It's just what makes you happy, what makes your orchids happy, and so on. So don't be afraid to use things that are not necessarily found in nature, like hydrogen peroxide, or cinnamon, or magnesium sulfate, or so on. As long as you observe that your orchids might benefit from it, everything is good. Okay, so thank you for watching, and I hope you're enjoying your hobby, no matter how you want to keep your orchids, whether more natural or whether you like to use artificial stuff. The most important thing is that you enjoy what you do. So alright, if you want to see more videos, don't forget to subscribe. You can also leave me your suggestions or comments or questions in the comment section below, and I will answer. And yeah, visit orchidnature.com if you want to get in touch with us. I will see you next time. Bye!